Today, we're going to be talking about 10 codependent thought patterns that keep us stuck and in toxic relationships. We all have what's known as schemas, and a schema is basically a mind map. It's a plan. It's the way that our brain has organized information. And it's sort of, the way I look at it, it's sort of like a blueprint that we run on autopilot. So it helps us understand who we are. It helps us understand who other people are. And the really interesting thing about a schema is that it can be dysfunctional. And so you can be running what I call a subconscious program, which it is a program, that was downloaded into you by the time that you were 7 years old, based on very limited information, based on subjectivity, not objectivity, based on what you experienced in your childhood, and you can think that the way you're running your life is completely normal and correct for you, and that schema, that program, that plan that you have that is rolling around in your head, that you are living off of, literally behaving from, can be completely corrupt. And so today I wanted to talk about 10 of those schemas that many codependent people have, and many people in general who may not even know what it means to be codependent. Like, what's that? You know, codependency isn't in the DSM. You're not going to walk into a therapist's office, well, maybe you will more often now than 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. But in terms of a true diagnosis, codependency is not a true diagnosis. So codependency is one of those ambiguous concepts that has left a lot of us trying to figure out whether or not it applies to us. So many people have different definitions of codependency. I tend to think of codependency as a complete lack of self. And it is a result of many different factors. And if you want to get technical about it, you can really think about it in terms of schemas. These ideas that a plan has been put in place that you are living your life through. You know, it's like a set of blueprints. You want to build a skyscraper, you hire an architect and an engineer. They come together and they design this skyscraper. And everyone goes to work believing in these plans. And they set out and everybody works in accordance to this plan. And so, for instance, if you have a sense or a schema that you're unworthy, then you live your life. Your behavior manifests according to that schema. So let's talk about some of the schemas many codependents have and understand and see the connection to why so many codependents tend to end up in relationships with toxic people like narcissists, sociopaths, and psychopaths, because there is a connection. And so codependents tend to sacrifice their own beliefs for the sake of a relationship, or they sacrifice their own beliefs for the sake of another person. And so codependents have a very difficult time identifying how they feel, what they think, what they need, and what they believe. And when in a relationship with someone else, very oftentimes they will give up those beliefs so that the other person benefits, right? And so let's talk about the first schema. The first schema is abandonment. So abandonment is tied to this idea that we are afraid that our partners are going to abandon us and often leave us for someone who is better than us. And when you have this fear of abandonment that I think is tied to childhood neglect and or some type of emotional abuse or worse, when you suffer abandonment in childhood, what's really happening is you've never been able to secure a healthy bond to the people that you loved, and that ain't your fault. And so if you struggle with the fear of abandonment, if you feel anxious in your relationships, below the veil of consciousness, there might be a schema or a pattern running that has you believing that the person that you're with might leave you and might leave you for someone who's better than you. So this all also ties back to being afraid of not being enough. And so if you struggle with abandonment, then you might tolerate abusive behavior because you don't want to be alone, because the fear of being alone terrifies you. You have this toxic, bone-aching fear of loneliness. And it's tied to never feeling securely attached as a child. Because what you should have gained by the time you were a baby, 2 or 3 years old, you should have had this understanding that I am enough, that when I cry, people come. When it's cold, I cry and I am warmed. When I am frightened, I am held. When people go away, they come back. Mom and dad or my caretakers, I can depend on them to do and say what they're going to do. My parents, my caretakers attune themselves to me. I'm not fixated and hypervigilant in this world that I live in and worrying about what my parents think. Children will attune themselves to their parents in an effort to tune up with them and to not feel detached from them. And so many of the codependents that I've coached suffer with this, and I can tell you that I've suffered from this myself, so I understand it. The second thing is that if you're struggling with the sense that there's something wrong with you, there's some defect inside of you, and if that's the case, if you feel like there's something wrong with you, like you're broken, then you're going to carry shame. And so this develops into a feeling that you are unlovable, that no one's ever going to want you. These are literally thought patterns that you have below the veil of consciousness that you might not be aware of. And it's really important that you really, if this rings true to you, that you get a hold of it, because once you see a pattern, that's when you can change it. That's when you can reverse it. One of the things I always say is that you cannot fix a hole in the wall that you can't see. And so if you feel unwanted, if you feel ashamed of yourself, then what might happen is you're afraid, you have a fear of intimacy and a fear of vulnerability because you feel like, well, if they really knew who I was, then they'd leave me. And so this is why a lot of codependents will lie when they don't have to, or the adult child of an alcoholic who has grown up feeling inferior, unloved, and unlovable, and unworthy of connections. Sometimes they lie when they don't have to because there's this sense of defectiveness. I'm defective. There's something wrong with me. And if you knew what was really going on in my mind, you'd leave me. Again, going back to the fear of abandonment. And somebody who is struggling with this, who feels that they are defective in some way, may settle for an abusive relationship rather than really go for it because they don't think that they're worthy of an awesome relationship. Now, how many of us, I know I can, how many of us can relate to that schema? That was running in the background of my mind forever. Another schema is that we have this sense that we need other people, but it's an unhealthy dependence, right? So we fear that we're not capable of taking care of ourselves. We literally doubt that we have the ability to make our own decisions. And we are very insecure about what we think we should feel and what we need in taking care of ourselves. And so we will very oftentimes seek approval and seek permission and seek guidance from other people. And so it's not uncommon for someone who is in, for instance, an abusive relationship who is struggling with these types of negative schemas to stay in a dysfunctional relationship and doubt that they are being abused, or doubt that their partner is shady, or doubt that their partner is narcissistic. And in addition, they settle, they stay. They can't trust themselves. And if you are highly codependent, one of the things that you might do, I know I did it, you might be unhappy, but you don't feel like you have a right to be unhappy. And so you turn to your partner explaining, I'm not happy and I want to go into marriage counseling, and your partner turns around and says, well, you're crazy. You don't have a right to be unhappy. And all that does is kick up the shame, kick up this idea that we're defective in some way, and triggers our fear of abandonment. And so our dependency upon others actually intensifies. Another thing that we struggle with is, like I said earlier, we don't have a sense of self, and we can enmesh easily with others. And so this can happen if you had a codependent parent or even a narcissistic parent who smothered you as a child, who made you feel like it was your job to make them look good, or made you feel like it was your job to take care of them, made you feel like it was your job to actually anticipate their needs, which happens a lot when you grow up in the home of an alcoholic. If one or both of your parents is an alcoholic, it's very easy for the roles to be reversed and for you to become dependent on this person who is actually addicted and or highly dysfunctional. And so when you become enmeshed with someone, what happens? You lose your sense of self. And if this was the type of experience you were born into, instead of parents and caretakers helping you develop a sense of self, what ends up happening is you're directed on them. You're thinking about what they need. And so you're not developing your core self. You don't know what you think. You were too worried about what everyone else was thinking. You don't know what you feel. You've been conditioned to worry what mommy feels, what daddy feels, or what your older brother feels, or the person in the family that's causing the most chaos. You're taught, I have to worry about what they think and what they feel and what they need, not what I need. In addition to that, you're also in a survival strategy. You're just trying to survive. You're trying to avoid more pain. And so when this is going on, you're lacking a sense of self. You're losing yourself. Another schema has to do with feeling that you have failed in some way, like you're a failure. Nothing that you do is ever good enough. Nothing that you do is ever going to net you the happiness that you require. You feel inadequate. You feel like there's nothing about you that is good and or valuable to society. If this is you, you tend to compare yourself to other people. You put a lot of pressure on yourself. You can be perfectionistic. And when you're perfectionistic, you're always going to fail to some degree because there's no such thing as perfection. There's progress. There's a process. But if you have come from a dysfunctional home and you've learned that love is conditional, and unless you're constantly in a state of servitude or achieving something, then you're no good. You're a failure. And so this keeps you on this hamster's wheel. And on a very deep level, you are void of a sense of I am enoughness. And you feel like a failure. And this will dictate your behavior. It will dictate what you say yes to, what you say no to, what you tolerate in a relationship, and will not tolerate in a relationship. And the more you feel like a failure on the inside, the more you're going to most likely settle for a toxic relationship and not be able to get yourself out of it. You're not going to feel like you're worthy of it. Another schema is called subjugation. And so subjugation has to do with giving your control up to please others in an effort to please them, and in an effort to avoid conflict, in an effort to just, not rock the boat. You just, okay, I'm just going to let it go. And so you know that there's something that you should be investigating. You know that there's something that needs to be taken care of, but you let it go for the sake of pleasing someone else or for the sake of avoiding an argument. Have you ever been in an argument with someone and just let it go because you feared abandonment? That's what this is about. So this idea, this background program that has you giving up yourself or giving up control over a situation because you fear abandonment. And so if you struggle with this, then you're someone who might stay in a narcissistic relationship, or you might stay in a toxic relationship because you think there's more pleasure in letting go of control and giving it to the other person than there is in standing up for yourself. And so if this is you, you don't stand up for yourself very easily. And this is very, very common, especially if you struggle with feeling like you're not good enough. And giving up your control is tied to pleasing the narcissist in your life and avoiding retribution, avoiding further pain, and avoiding what will happen if the narcissist stays on the rampage. I saw my mother do this every single day of her life, living with my dad. And one of the things that I say is that, it turned her mind into mashed potatoes. Very, very sad to watch my mom give up her control to basically please my father. Another pattern that you might have running is tied to self-sacrifice. So this is when you sacrifice what you need for the sake of other people. You actually have this thought pattern running like, oh, it's good to put the other person first. Oh, it's bad to take care of myself. It is good to have someone else's needs be met before my own needs. It's selfish if I put myself in front of other people. This happens a lot if you grew up in a religious home where religion was used against you to sort of like mold you into whatever your parents wanted you to be. Even in school sometimes, in any type of institution, you can be taught to self-sacrifice. Cults do this. They get you to sacrifice yourself for the doctrine of the leader. You have to give up yourself. You have to give up complete control, and you have to sacrifice yourself because of what this leader is telling you to do. Now, that could be in a group mentality, or it could be in a relationship. And so if you put your needs on the back burner all the time, and it's tied to feeling selfish, it's tied to thinking that it's your job to make everybody else happy. What ends up happening over time usually is that below the surface, you are growing in anger and resentment because you're not allowing yourself to live an authentic life. And if this is happening and you think self-sacrifice is the way to go, you're going to end up in relationships with people that want you to sacrifice the self for their self. That's why when I think about a codependent and a narcissistic relationship, the way that I look at it is two people in one relationship, two people worried about one person in that one relationship. Rather than there be a give and a take, it's two people who are focused on one self. And that self is the more toxic, narcissistic of the two, especially when there is a codependent in a situation and below the veil of consciousness, their schema is self-sacrifice. It's my job to make everybody else happy. And so it's something to really look at. Number 8, another schema is that we think that we need the approval of others. Now, again, it's really important to recognize that these thought patterns are subconscious. We don't wake up and say, I'm going to go seek the approval of my boss today, or I'm going to go seek the approval of my mother-in-law today, or I'm going to go seek the approval of my wife today, and I'm going to anticipate all of her needs, and then she will be happy, and then she'll pat me on the back, and then I know that I'm okay and we're okay. We don't have that conscious thought. When you're dealing with a schema, when you're dealing with a subconscious program, you're dealing with an invisible blueprint. But your behavior is matching that blueprint. Sort of like the skyscraper that you eventually see manifest is actually a manifestation of what was on this blueprint. And you can look at your behavior as in similar ways. So the skyscraper will represent how you show up in the relationship. That's the manifestation of it. And so if you have this idea in your head that it's your job, you have to seek the approval of other people. You also might seek permission to feel and think and do what you want to do as an adult. And you might not even be aware of it. A big problem with this is that many of us tie our sense of self and our level of self-esteem to how well we can gain the approval of others. And if you live with someone who was avoidant or who stonewalled you or a parent who withheld love from you, then what happens to your self-esteem? It's always low because there is some thought pattern running that has you believing that in order to feel worthy, you have to gain this person's approval. You have to gain that person's validation. And so your sense of self is tied to how well you're able to achieve this validation from the external world, which is spiritually backwards. Because in order to spiritually grow and evolve, you have to surrender to these attachments. You have to surrender to this idea that you need validation from the outside. Because unfortunately, if you're struggling with these types of mind maps, then you're not going to manifest healthy relationships. You're going to manifest relationships that keep you on this hamster wheel of seeking approval. And unfortunately, you're going to manifest people that will pick up on that vulnerability within you, and they will exploit it against you so that you keep seeking their approval. And as you do, they're able to maintain power and control in a relationship. Toxic people are not in relationships because they want to relate to other people. Toxic people are in relationships to other people because they want power, control, and dominance. They want something from you. It's not that they want to give to you and they see you as an autonomous 3D human being that has your own set of needs, that has your own set of wants, your own set of beliefs. No, that's not how they see you. And so if you struggle with this, you may put up with toxic abuse. And it isn't until you see the pattern that you can change the pattern. Number 9, emotional inhibition is tied to us not being able to express our true self. And so we inhibit ourselves. We tone ourselves down. We keep everything bottled up inside of us. We're afraid to express what we really think and feel. You may have grown up in a house where you were marginalized, you were minimized, you were chastised for having a need and or a want. And so this has programmed you to feel and think and believe that expressing yourself is actually a frightening and scary thing and wrong thing to do. And so you will suppress your needs. You will suppress your happiness. You will suppress your joy. You won't know how to express yourself. I remember growing up and sitting around the table at dinner time with my family, and it was this complete feeling like I had to keep everything under wraps. I couldn't smile. I couldn't cry. Like I had to be flat because I felt like any hint of me laughing was fearful, because if I let myself go and I had a moment of vulnerability, my mom was going to squash it, or my dad was going to say something about me laughing, or they'd make fun of my laugh, or what are you laughing at? What do you think so funny? There was something that would happen. And so it's not uncommon if you come from a home where there's alcoholism, or your parents are adult children of alcoholics, and they're struggling with expressing their emotions, and they're inhibited emotionally. It won't be uncommon for you to also struggle with the fear of allowing yourself to actually express yourself. The other thing is that this is also tied to the fear that you have to keep yourself in check, because what's most important is what other people think and what other people feel. So your emotions are secondary. And so if this is a pattern that's running below the veil and this resonates with you, and you're recognizing it maybe even for the first time, hallelujah, because that means you can see it. And if you can see it, you can fix it. You can begin asking yourself, how do I feel? One of the greatest tools that I share inside my coaching program is having my clients pay attention throughout the day. How do I feel? How does that sunset make me feel? How does that person make me feel? How did I feel when I watched that movie? How do I feel when I speak to my sister? How do I feel when I'm in my office, right? And really getting in touch, bringing your awareness back into your body. You're not dissociating anymore, right? So if you can see this, if you can recognize the emotional inhibition in you, then you're able to recognize when you need to pay more attention to how you feel so that you can tap into how you feel and express it. One of the safest ways to do this is to journal about it. I do not believe that we should go around telling everybody how we feel. You know, that's not the goal. The goal is for you to know how you feel. And when you're dealing with people that you trust, and when it's important to express how you feel, because personally how you feel is your gold. That's gold. You know, you think about people on a busy Manhattan street, they're not talking to each other about how they feel. They're strangers, right? Lots of times if you struggle with codependency, you are open with people you shouldn't be open with. You know, you say something to a stranger about an affair that your wife had, right? But yet, you know, you don't tell your friends that your wife had an affair, or it takes you a year to tell your life coach or a therapist that your wife had an affair or that you had an affair. And so oftentimes we're inappropriate with who we share our emotions with. And I think it's a way for us to be honest temporarily and to get it out in a safe way, because if we express ourselves to a stranger, there's not a whole lot of vulnerability in that. But express ourselves to our therapist, express ourselves to our mother, to our father, to our husband, to our wife, or to our children and our friends, that's very, very scary. And so you might struggle with that if you came from a dysfunctional home or if you're struggling with codependency. And like I said, if this resonates with you, great, because now you can work on it. Now you can ask yourself, how do I feel? How do I feel? How do I feel? How do I feel? Now you can start a journal, a how do I feel journal. Now you can start asking yourself, tuning into yourself, how do I feel? How do I feel? How do I feel? And you can start regulating who it is that you share yourself with. Very important that you learn to share yourself with safe people and people who actually care about you. And pay attention to when you're sharing in inappropriate ways, when you're telling people things that are very, very personal that maybe you shouldn't tell them. And that's a very common thing for people who have come from dysfunctional homes. We don't know how to do that. You know, it's very childlike. We don't know how to tell the teacher that something bad is going on at home, but we go to the candy store and we tell the lady behind the counter that something bad happened at home. But we don't tell the authority. We don't tell the person that we know that actually matters. So if you struggle with that and you're just hearing that for the first time, that's awesome, because it means it's something that you can actually work on. The other idea is that the values that you hold for yourself are unrealistic. This is very much tied to thinking that I need to work my tail off to be in a relationship with someone because I am not good enough. This happens all the time. We end up, if you're a housewife and you're not working anymore outside the home, you end up scrubbing the tiles with a toothbrush, hoping that your husband or your wife notices when they walk in the door. You end up being a complete scrubber, like you've got bleach in your hands, like every wall is bleached, every corner looks amazing, but you don't realize that you're becoming very rigid. Perhaps your children have to look perfect. The lawn has to look perfect. Everything's got to look perfect. The kids' backpacks have to look perfect. So there's this sense of rigidity and this fear of being criticized. And so if you're pushing yourself, if you are relentless towards pushing yourself and driving yourself to be perfectionistic, below the veil, you might not realize you're doing this because you think you have to do this in order to be of value to your partner, and you're also doing it to avoid criticism. And if this rings true for you, you might want to learn to let go. You might want to see where you're crossing the line, where you might be too rigid around your children, too rigid around your partner, too rigid around standards that you set for yourself and other people. You might want to investigate as to whether or not it's tied to this thing that I have to work in order to be in a relationship to prove my value. I can totally relate to that idea. I didn't feel good enough and I thought I had to prove myself over and over and over and over and over. All came from childhood. And that is the miracle of codependency recovery. The miracle of codependency recovery is that you awaken. You recognize that you were once living below the veil of consciousness. You recognize that your behavior is a manifestation of all of these schemas or unconscious, subconscious, faulty beliefs, negative beliefs that you learned in childhood. And in that space is the miracle of awakening, the miracle of self-awareness. It is the road back to you. Dear one, you can find the road back to you. No one has to live this way. No one should live this way. It's not living. It's not living. This is an autopilot life, and it doesn't have to be. And so if you find yourself in toxic relationships, Ask yourself if any of these subconscious programs ring true for you, and see if you can work on detaching yourself from them. See if you can exercise and journal and ask yourself, what do I think? What do I feel? How can I feel more worthy just because I am? Meditate. I have plenty of meditations on Insight Timer and on YouTube that will help you return to the self. Use journaling to help you. If you're interested in my membership site, we have a monthly theme that we release every single month that includes a podcast and journaling prompts and a mantra. People love it. If you're interested in this type of codependency recovery, you can check out my on-demand program, the 12-week breakthrough coaching program, that will help you awaken and help you figure out if these beliefs sit with you, actually if they are in your subconscious mind, and what you can do to fix them. Never give up. If this stuff relates to you, never give up. My life is proof that you can overcome the limiting beliefs that have been programmed into you before you were 7, when you were in a hypnotic brainwave state. That's when most of this stuff has been downloaded into us. Like this, you don't have to live like this. You don't have to live in toxic relationships, and you don't have to stay codependent for the rest of your life. So I hope that this session has proved beneficial. And if you'd like to learn more about me and my products, my codependency workshops, the memberships, the programs, and all that, just go to www.lisaaromano.com. Namaste, everybody, as a bow to the love and the light that is absolutely in you. And please, when you're out and about, never, never, ever forget to think. Bye for now.